I was recently asked to remotely judge a photographic competition of around 100 images. About half of them were in a set subject and the other half were an open category. I enjoy remote judging because I think it gives me more time to think and deliberate. I'm not faced with an image that suddenly appears on screen, as it would in a live judging, where I'm expected to start speaking intelligently about an image I've only just caught sight of. Remote judging also allows me to browse the images in my own time and get a feel for what's been presented to me before I even start making any decisions. It also takes away that element of guesswork too, because if I spot a technical fault, maybe excessive noise or the image is unsharp somewhere, I can take a look at the metadata to see what camera settings were used. Any comments I then make are more likely to be based on fact rather than calculated guesswork, which is bound to be wrong a fair part of the time. If the purpose of constructive comment is to offer guidance and help, and most clubs say that this is their aim, then I've got time to do a better job. Even when I've made my first call on the images, I've got time to go through them quite a few times, just to make sure I wasn't overly harsh on some, or even overly lenient, trying to be balanced and fair. I also don't feel the need to walk that politically correct grey line which some judges tend to do, or try to do. That line where we manufacture all sorts of words to avoid saying what is obvious to everyone. Well seen, nice capture, interesting approach, good colour, all meaningless statements, especially when it's obvious to everyone viewing that none of those statements could be applied to the image on screen. Now, I think it's much better to be honest. I think most people still value an honest, truthful opinion, even if they don't quite agree with it. Now, I've been a member of Camera Club since I was in my early 20s, so that's quite a number of years now. I've lived in the UK and also Australia, so I've got a fairly good feel, I think, for the standard of Camera Club competitions. All my experience is marks out of 10. Now, I didn't really give this a great deal of thought because it just seemed natural and I've never questioned that. Why would I? But in this competition, I was asked to place the images in the following categories: entry, acceptance, merit, and honour. Now, I had noticed this way of category marking when I first came to Australia about 10 years ago. But as my own club here still uses marks out of 10, I still didn't really give it much thought. I do recall asking an Australian friend of mine about 6 years ago if he could explain this entry, acceptance, merit and honour. But it soon became pretty clear that he wasn't entirely sure himself, and he had been round clubs quite a long time too. But still I didn't dwell on it until now, when I'm asked to use this way of marking. So I decided to look at this category marking from a common sense angle. Well, that's what I thought. I think anyone could easily work out what sort of image would gain an honour. An image that stood out from the crowd, both in content and quality. But that image may even have that something extra. That's something that's not always easy to describe, but we all seem to know it when we see it. Once we have the honour established, I think we can work out where the merit fits in. An image with most of the qualities of an honour, but maybe just falling short a little in one way or another. We could say, perhaps, a near miss. Now, would these two be a reasonable judgment, do you think? Now we get to the acceptance category and I start to get a little confused. Over the past few years I've entered one or two multi-club competitions that use this method of judging. Now I didn't attend the judging because they were held some distance away, but one or two of my images didn't gain an acceptance. I was a bit confused as to what this meant. Why were they not accepted? If the images were not accepted, did that indicate that they were judged as below standard? Or maybe was it that they weren't up to the standard of the other entries? I've had some wins in these types of competitions, so I do know what the standard required is, and I do make sure that I meet that quality standard. So I assumed here that non-acceptance meant that in that competition my images were considered ordinary or below that standard level. Disappointing, but that's life. Now that experience has caused a little confusion, but now back to the competition I have to judge. I sort of thought it was about time that I committed enough time and energy to really fully understand this system. So I thought I'd do some research online, and I looked for a definition or an idea of what the general consensus was for entry, acceptance, merit and honour. Now I'm sure there is one out there in the World Wide Web somewhere, but I lost the will to keep searching before I found it. I did find plenty of references to entry, acceptance, merit and honour, but I couldn't find any explanation at all. What I did find was that different clubs seem to apply different marks to each of these categories. So given that I'm used to marking out of 10, I used that and applied it to entry, acceptance, merit and honour with a bit of common sense. Well, that's what I thought. I figured that an honour would be an image that was given a mark of 10. As I've said before, an exceptionally good image in content, quality and execution. That leaves a mark of 9, which would fall nicely into the category of merit. Better than most images, but falling just a little bit short of the honours. So far, so good. Now let me go down to the entry category, skipping acceptance for a moment. I took the view that if I felt an image was below the standard of the general images presented, it would probably be marked lower than 5. In that case, it would be placed in the E entry category. Now of course this left those images that would score 5, 6, 7 and 8, which would then all have to reside in the acceptance category. Of course my scoring could be varied just a little bit, but broadly it seemed to work. So on the basis of what I thought made sense with entry, acceptance, merit and honour, I went ahead and made my decisions. Eventually I returned the score sheet to the competition secretary, but I got an email back pretty soon which said, I see you've awarded images an E category. Judges don't usually do that. Well, that seemed a bit confusing to me, but I was told that this is generally given for images that fail to meet a set subject category, they're well outside the subject, or for an image that really is badly out of focus. Now it would have been nice to have this information written down somewhere beforehand, but nevertheless, I went back to the images to take another look. None of those I'd given an entry to could be considered wildly off the set subject, or badly out of focus. Well, maybe a few, but not many. But this meant that all those I had considered as being entitled to a mark of 3 or 4 were now elevated up into the acceptance category with images that I would have given 5, 6, 7 and 8. Now you know what that means. The vast majority of the images fall into this category and get an acceptance award. Now this seemed just a little bit odd to me because it didn't match my experience of my own images not being accepted in that competition I was referring to earlier. So let's just think about what we're talking about here. If we're going to have a competition with 100 images, we're going to have a situation where perhaps 20% would fall into the merit and honours, sometimes I would argue, possibly less. But of course that means that 80% of the images are all going to fall into that one category of acceptance. Now, does that make a whole lot of sense to you? Because it doesn't to me. I did ask why this method of marking is used, but I was told it's always been like that, and the person I asked didn't seem to know the reason the system was originally introduced. Let me try to make my point in a slightly different way. I went to the doctor the other day and I told the doctor about a pain I was getting in my head. He asked me to describe the severity of the pain on a 1 to 10 scale, and I was able to tell him it was a 7, sometimes bordering on an 8. So even though I, the patient, may have never met this doctor before, within seconds we both knew what we were talking about, assuming the patient, me, wasn't exaggerating the pain. Now let's come at that again in a slightly different way. I went to the doctor the other day and told the doctor about a pain I was getting in my head. He asked me to describe the severity of the pain. Was it an entry pain? Did I find it acceptable? Would I say the pain had merit, or was it one I would award an honour? You can see what I mean. I don't have a clue where those boundaries are, and it seems to me that many club members don't either. If they could, they'd be able to describe the system to me, and no one has yet done that. The good news is that the doctor diagnosed my headache as stress caused by a ridiculous marking system that makes sure that the majority of entries all fall into the same category, and no one really knows how they're doing in relation to others, which is how we generally grade ourselves, how we tell how we're doing. Since that time, I've asked a number of people if they can explain the entry acceptance, merit and honour system. Now that request has been quite an eye-opener. Human nature really is a very odd thing, and I can understand those academics who study it. People's willingness to stand in front of you, put on their best authoritative voice, and explain something to you that you soon realise they know nothing at all about. Why can't we just look one another in the eye sometimes and admit we don't know? Now I can't know for sure why this entry, acceptance, merit and honour system was introduced, but I think I might be able to hazard a guess. I think the acceptance award represents that politically correct swathe of meaningless grey that the majority of images can be placed into. The good news is, delicate souls whose feelings can be irreparably damaged by a stray word or a rejection are protected from harm. The bad news is I get a headache, and most people I speak to can't make head nor tail of the system either. They just go along with it because that's what's always been done. Why do we take something that is blatantly obvious and simple, marks out of 10, and in the interests of protecting people's feelings, if that's why it's done, change things so they become obscure? Back in 1970, in southeast London, there was something like 20 clubs in a 7-mile radius, many clubs affiliated to large companies as well as boroughs. All clubs marked out of 10, and all the club battles, and there were a lot of them, were also marked in the same way. but everyone knew exactly where they were. Progress, eh?